Hi, welcome to my presentation on counselors' roles in connecting gentrified communities. My name is Myra Crescent. If you have any questions, please hold them until the end. At that point, we'll have a kind of question and discussion time. If you're here, this is what you're going to be looking at. We are going to discuss how gentrification impacts education in terms of individual experiences and school choice. And then by the end of this presentation, you'll be formulating a plan for looking at your own community and helping your own residents. All right, so it helps to know where I'm from as we go into this discussion. I am from the home of Shiplap, from the Silo District. If you're an HGTV fan, you know I'm talking about the home of Chip and Joanna Gaines, the home of Magnolia. It is Waco, Texas. And so as I talk about Waco, I'm also going to be talking about this little red dot a few miles south of Waco. That is Lorena ISD, where I teach. So you'll hear me referring and showing you multiple locations around Waco and then Lorena. So first, it helps to have us know what gentrification is. You may have heard it. It's a buzzword in social reform because people are seeing that in communities there are disproportionate removals or exploitations of vulnerable populations. And gentrification refers to the change in those neighborhoods, the removal or leaving of vulnerable populations to be replaced by more affluent, privileged populations. So to help us understand where this comes from or why it's happening, you might think of these kind of beginning pieces, these why it happens, the start. So gentrification, or the removal of populations, might be intentional in terms of they're trying to better a neighborhood through urban renewal. Or there are safety conditions that people must leave for their own safety. You might also see that gentrification becomes consequential in terms of, let's say, like in New Orleans, when we had a natural disaster that forced people out. Or in COVID-19, we're seeing economic fallout that is causing people not to be able to afford their homes. So they're then leaving to be replaced by people that can afford those homes. However, we have to be careful in this discussion that these we refer to maybe as catalysts and not the cause. Because what we will begin to see through this is that gentrification is really a manifestation of social inequality. And so the cause is human interaction and human error. These might just be the things that begin to reveal those human errors and create change. What gentrification will look like when it's happening. There might be direct gentrification when we see people moving out, or indirect, where those moving in will affect who is actually living there. The most obscure is going to be the cultural gentrification, when we see a combination of who's moving out as a result of who's moving in. When people move in, they're going to bring a new culture, a new atmosphere into an environment. And the original residents will feel that pressure and feel that change and maybe feel less welcome, and that'll cause them to leave. Now, in our discussions so far, the bottom line is that we need to know that disproportionately removing marginalized populations, those vulnerable populations. And as we've discussed so far, that generally takes the form of a financial kind of supply and demand look. So we'll see fewer housing units available for whatever reason, whatever the catalyst or cause, and that will result in higher prices. And when vulnerable populations can't afford those higher prices, you have gentrification, a changing of the neighborhood. And we tend to think of this, we might relate it to bigger cities in the US. You might think of New York or Chicago. However, it is happening here in Texas. So if you look at this, a study done from 2000 to 2015 found that income bracket quartiles were raising within 3 miles of city centers of these big metropolitan areas. So essentially what this is telling you is that residents in the city centers are becoming more affluent, meaning maybe there's less housing for lower income families. While gentrification is mostly an issue surrounding financial status, the actual demographic of those marginalized populations can vary. So we do see, this is a chart showing us the growth rate for these populations in city center within 3 miles, and we're seeing negative growth rates for, yes, low-income residents, but also residents without a college degree, Hispanic residents, even Black residents, except for in Dallas. That's our only outlier. But across the board, we're seeing that these are our vulnerable populations, that within city centers, they're losing housing opportunities. Here's another look at how you might view those vulnerable populations. We have in there low-income families, also renters, people without degrees, and then persons of color. So now when we begin to talk about those populations, that's when we can get into how it looks or what it looks like in education. So first, you might see an individual effect on students. When they feel conflict or a changing culture, they will internalize those messages. So if they feel that people coming into a neighborhood, their neighborhood, are not in approval of their culture or their identity, they will then question that identity. On a broader scale, the topic of gentrification pulls in another education buzzword of school choice. When we have communities changing, we'll see sentiments about local schools changing as well. So those might take the form of how a school's success, and that might be a reason residents choose to go to a different school. They might not choose the public school. They can go to a charter school or a private school. They might also see or quote diversity as a reason for not approving of a local public school. So maybe they're seeking more diversity. They don't want all white or all Black. They don't want true division. They want to see some diversity, and maybe other school options can provide that. So then that leads us into what is our role? How do we combat these issues, or how do we help navigate them in our community? And it's really a matter of location and population. So moving forward here, I'll start to give you some questions to help you develop a plan for evaluating your own communities. So knowing your location comes down to these couple questions. And in the next slides, I'll go through what researching these questions might look like for you. So schools in the area. By going to greatschools.org, you can see the district lines and select what public schools are in your area. So you see the neighborhood public schools. You can also click and add in to see what charter schools are offered in your area. This will help you better understand what options parents have in terms of school choice. And then you can search the demographics of those schools. So here's one public school in the Waco area, and here is a charter school. So you can see the different demographics and the different student-teacher ratio. These would be things that parents might consider in not choosing their local public school. It also might help you understand your individual school or scratch the surface of that school identity. Zooming in, you can begin to just look at your neighborhoods within your school district. So this is my school district, Lorena, and within Lorena, within a mile of each other, we have our lowest income housing development and we have our highest income housing development. Seeing this, we might begin to understand our vulnerable locations where gentrification might be taking place or could take place in the future. So then we know which students to look out for, and we know where and what their neighborhoods are experiencing. Once you've identified neighborhoods, you can begin to look at the history of neighborhoods. So going back into Waco, there is a concerted effort for urban renewal in East Waco, namely Elm Avenue. So that to give you some perspective, here's Magnolia, here's Baylor University, and we're just going north of the Brazos River. So here it helps us to understand the history of this area. So Bridge Street, right here, was a center for Black businesses. However, laws did not permit living and businesses of Black residents around that street. So looking at this will inform your perception of identity and help you understand maybe what neighborhoods have been up against. It'll also help you understand the sentiment surrounding a neighborhood. So in this area of proposed urban renewal, we have the project leaders who say there's a lack of safety and they want to recreate that atmosphere to be more inviting and vibrant. However, when you talk to Elm Street residents, they'll say that they like that identity, they feel good about it, and they want to replicate that. You can see here a disparity in the discussions. And knowing this, understanding these previous questions, will give you a broad understanding of the context, so then you can connect with your community and your students. So here are some questions you can ask in terms of developing a relationship and helping your students. So the main goal here is to bridge the gap. While literature on the roles of school officials meeting the needs of gentrified communities is limited, counselors stand in a position that can bridge individual identity, school culture, and community. We don't have understandings of national gentrification, and we shouldn't, because gentrification is localized and it affects individual, unique communities. So what that looks like in terms of helping individual students. Using those questions to know who might be a target, developing a relationship, and getting them to talk about their experiences. One of the strongest things counselors can do is help students understand their unique identity and how that adds to a culture. Help them find their place in this and to see their value, their individual value. Then we can take this to a more broad community. Counselors can serve as almost the glue that connects community members, parents, and the divide between ideals that we've seen so far. So by getting involved, they maybe can develop projects that bridge these gaps and help connect communities and create a smoother progression that does not lead to necessarily the negative consequences of gentrification. Even though we have systematic control over vulnerable populations for decades, we've seen that, widespread studies are scarce, as they should be. Each community is unique and thus requires a unique approach. Your schools and students will be better served by any understanding you gain of the identity. So anywhere you can start can help you understand gentrified communities and help you better serve your community. On these following slides, you'll find information from my presentation as well as additional insights. But at this time, I'd like to open up a discussion and hear your questions about this topic.